Hello and welcome to Mobility Now, a television show created by the Houston-Galveston Area Council. I'm your host, Alan Clark, H-GAC's Director of Transportation. Today we'll discuss a concept called livable centers. Did you ever wish you could walk to some of your favorite destinations? Let's take a look at this video on livable centers.
A walkable community may begin with safe and attractive sidewalks and public transportation stops. But to be truly walkable, the community should also include destinations to walk to. That's the basic idea behind livable centers. Livable centers is a concept growing in popularity and making the idea of a more walkable region a reality. Livable centers let you walk to lunch or to shops and other destinations within your community without using a car. And livable centers are built to make walking, biking, or taking public transportation an easy way for you to get where you want to go. Millions of residents drive to work, or to school, or to run errands every day, putting a strain on the region's roadways and polluting the air. Now imagine what traffic would look like if more people could get where they want to go without driving. That's what livable centers are designed to do. But the benefits of livable centers stretch beyond reducing traffic congestion. Livable centers help promote a high quality of life and sense of community for everyone who lives, works, and plays there.
As we continue to work, there will be, as we said, transit-oriented development, which will be new residences, a lot of new retail. This whole area is under retailed, so it's simple things like grocery stores, coffee shops, museums, trails, reconnect to Buffalo Bayou. So what we're doing now is laying the groundwork for a vibrant, thriving community.
The Houston-Galveston Area Council partnered with local communities across the region to create livable centers. Several plans were recognized for their design and innovation, including the City of Tomball, the City of Houston, and the City of Waller.
The early phases of the Livable Center include the 3-block area that we're in right now on the west end of Main Street. And it's a matter of improving the drainage, taking the drainage underground so that we can improve the sidewalk areas. The plan calls for 10-foot sidewalks, making a much more walkable environment. It also has to do with increasing the quality of life in the small town and therefore creating more jobs in the small town and creating some reverse commuting along the 290 corridor, which can balance out some of that rush hour congestion.
Livable centers work in any setting, from Houston's up-and-coming East End to more rural areas like Waller. You can be a part of the Livable Center's success story by visiting a center near you or by getting involved in the Livable Centers project in your area.
My guest today is Jeff Table, Houston-Galveston Area Council Director of Community Environmental Planning. Jeff works with cities and counties to improve the quality of life by providing for orderly growth and economic development. Along with others, he also works to maintain and enhance the region's natural environment. Jeff, welcome to Mobility Now.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Jeff, we saw some great pictures a moment ago showing some livable centers in our area. But exactly what is a livable center? How do you define it?
Sure. Well, I guess at its most basic, a livable center is a place where offices and stores and restaurants and even residences are within walking distance of one another. And they're connected by a really good sidewalk and crosswalk network so people can really feel safe and comfortable walking without having to worry about dodging cars or looking out for driveways. Even the design of buildings in a livable center makes a difference. Oftentimes we think of places with a big parking lot and lots of asphalt. Not very appealing to walk, even if there is a good sidewalk. So livable centers tend to have places where the building is more geared towards the pedestrian experience, maybe doing some window shopping. Oftentimes livable centers are associated with a park or a plaza or some other sort of public space, and make some great places for people watching and often become a real destination in the community. But I guess the simplest way I would sum it all up is we like to think of livable centers as a place where a person can live, work, and play without necessarily having to get in their car for all those sorts of trips.
Yeah, it sounds like the kinds of places that maybe we've had in the past and grew out of.
Well, indeed. We used to have a tradition of planning our cities and towns like this, and then focused on getting around faster in our cars, and that was good for a long time. But now with about 6 million of us in the region fighting for parking spaces and roadway widths, if we can get some of those short trips off of the roads that people would enjoy walking if they had a good place to walk, that can begin to add up and make a difference. So I think maybe everything old is new again.
Well, Jeff, what are some of the outcomes or the things that cities or communities are trying to achieve with livable centers? You mentioned one, trying to maybe reduce some traffic congestion?
Right. I think that's a big key. If you think about maybe my wife and I are going out for dinner and we want to get an ice cream afterwards and maybe forget to get a birthday card for someone, you think about a place, a livable center, where all three of those trips, even if we drive to get there, could be made on foot. As opposed to getting out and wrestling with other drivers on traffic driving all those. So I think that's one. Another thing I think that is helpful for communities is it can reduce the amount of parking that's necessary, because if everybody isn't just driving to their own parking spot at each space, that can be consolidated and more land can be used for parks or for income generating uses. Then the final one, I think, is really economic development. If people feel comfortable, if there's a great environment for people walking around, they tend to want to stay a little longer, maybe spend some more money at those local businesses or restaurants. And I think it helps communities with marketing too, because it kind of sets them apart to have a special place, a focal point, if you will.
In other words, it gives them an identity.
Right, exactly.
A place to go to and a place to be.
How would you describe, your community to somebody? Oftentimes it is that special central place that comes to mind.
Well, in just a moment, we're going to talk some more about the kinds of studies that H-GAC has done, the kinds of communities and the great variety of communities that are interested in this concept. I know that you've done 17, almost 20 of these studies now. Some of them have been recognized nationally as award-winning efforts. And I know that many communities are excited about the kinds of things they could achieve through livable centers. And when we come right back, we'll explain more about livable centers.
The Houston-Galveston Area's Transportation Policy Council, or TPC, is a forum for regional transportation planning. The TPC is part of the Houston-Galveston Area Council and consists of representatives from cities, counties, and transportation agencies. Many TPC members are council members, mayors, county commissioners, and judges. The TPC is responsible for developing regional transportation plans and funding priorities including highways, bicycle trails, and public transportation.
Houston Transtar entrega información de tráfico en tiempo real al alcance de sus dedos, con herramientas rápidas y fáciles de usar. Usted podrá llegar a donde va con su constructor adaptable de rutas. Sus alertas personalizadas le mantendrán alejado de los problemas. Houston Transtar es el líder en la información de tráfico. Houston Transtar, instantáneo, preciso, confiable.
Welcome back to Mobility Now. My guest Jeff Table and I are discussing livable centers. Jeff, I want to talk about the kinds of different places that are interested in livable centers. I know that there are areas close in to downtown Houston, but I know you've worked in other places around our region as well. Can you talk about some of those?
Definitely. The one thing I really want to stress with this program, and the thing that makes it so exciting for us, it is not a one-size-fits-all. We think this concept is scalable and adaptable to a lot of different locations. Now, you've heard from a couple of our partners, and I think that's just an interesting illustration right there of how this concept can work in a place like the east end of Houston, which is a very urban place with transit under construction right next to downtown, and really looking at an existing fabric that sort of they got away from for a while and now reclaiming that. Then on the other end of the spectrum, going to a place like Waller, which is a small town really out beyond where growth has gotten thus far, but forward thinking about, what about that day when perhaps we'll have commuter rail? And how are we going to position ourselves against the other small towns and suburban communities out here? And how can we rebuild that historical small town street grid that people are familiar with oftentimes from their younger days? I grew up in a small town like that where all activity was around the square. And then finally, a third point of the triangle, if you will, is we did a project with the Energy Corridor. So this is a very suburban, auto-oriented place where they're looking at, maybe we could rethink the way the parking lot and those office buildings are set up and really create a livable center on that land. And maybe we could link that into the bikeway network, some of the outstanding bike facilities around there. And how could we build those connections into some of the residential neighborhoods nearby? And my answer is, where's the best place to do a livable center? All three of those are great examples, because I think these concepts can work in various different settings.
And you've worked in not only very urban places, very rural places, but in a number of our fast-growing suburban communities as well.
Oh, definitely. In League City, in the NASA area, in Tomball, Northwest, and a project in northern Harris County. So again, I think the components, if we create those clusters of activities and the right sort of connections for people to walk around, and especially if we can blend that in with transit service, you've got the ingredients of a successful livable center.
And when I think about some of those places, clearly economic growth is happening there and around them. So what are they really looking to achieve?
Well, I think one of the things is this economic growth going to have staying power? I think most of us are familiar with there's a lot of retail areas that are not looking so good these days. The new development comes in, and then maybe some other new development goes a little bit farther out, and that old shopping center doesn't look quite as good. I think there's a realization that today, designing around, and I know this is kind of a abstract term, but designing around the place. Like you said, image of a community as sort of the central point is something that I think towns and cities and counties know that's not going to go out of style anytime soon, because people like to people watch. They enjoy being able to accomplish a number of different activities without having to hassle with traffic. And with the growth we're projecting, it doesn't look like that's going to be going away anytime soon. So I think it's a long-term value proposition for these communities.
Well, I know that in some of the ones you've worked in, they really feel different to be there, because at 5 o'clock, everyone doesn't go home. You still have stores and shops. Some of them stay open a little later, but you have people there.
Well, I think that's another thing that communities are interested in is a safety issue. You think about a shopping center that gets a little bit dark and that parking lot's a bit foreboding. So the idea of having activities and things going on that are those additional eyes on the street. And of course, if the business hours run a little bit longer, that's more economic activity in that town too. So.
Very much so. And then in some areas, there seems to be an opportunity, as you said before, to kind of reclaim maybe what was there before, or to reuse some land uses that aren't very high valued.
Oh, definitely. I think we have some places both in central Houston as well as small towns and suburban areas in between where we build a lot of really good infrastructure. The street system is there, the sidewalks are there, but over time we moved on, and maybe some of those areas aren't used as well as they could be now. And I think that's a great opportunity, is when we can fill in some of those blank spots. We're not necessarily inconveniencing a property owner or a residential neighborhood at all, because frankly the land is just vacant right now, and it's not contributing revenue or jobs or really anything pleasant to look at.
Or maybe some communities are actually creating those places for the first time. I'm
Definitely.
thinking about the Sugar Land Town Center.
Well, you know, I think that is a very interesting example you pose, because that was really the first one in this area. So the city of Sugar Land and the developers on that project were pioneers in a way, but I think it has been successful, and you know, certainly we've seen the Woodlands Town Center and City Center and other projects. So I think the private sector is definitely on board with this idea. I think the thing that we're going to need to live into some more is how can local governments and citizens and the private sector be partners on projects such as this, because they can be a bit more complicated than some of the types of development that we see traditionally around.
Well, yeah, and again, Sugar Land, they obviously built a new city hall
Right.
At that location that was next to a traditional shopping mall, and now have redeveloped the parking areas with
Right.
a lot more stores and activity, and very much oriented to being able to just walk that area.
Right, and I think there's a lot of opportunity as that continues to excuse me, evolve and build out for the Sugar Land Town Square, to create those sort of opportunities for synergy and those dynamics to play off each other. But I think what you talked about hit the nail on the head. When we've got a public place with government employees and stores and hotels and apartments, and it's all around this focal point, you know, that's where the community goes. That's where you would go, you know, to have a festival or to just hang out on a nice evening.
Well, and of course, some communities may have several locations that are like this, because, as you said, they don't all have to be the size of the Sugar Land Town Center. Some will be smaller, and maybe in areas where we have 2 or 3 in a particular part of town.
Well, I think that is our concept eventually, is that there will be lots of these nodes of livable centers. And I just want to mention, you know, we're still going to be a predominantly car-oriented city, and I know a lot of people prefer the single-family residential living style, but with the 3.5 to 4 million people we're expecting to come here, I think there's going to be a significant market for livable center types of live-work-play situations, and I don't think we're going to run out of demand for this anytime soon.
No, it sounds like an interesting concept. We'll take a look at some more livable centers after a short break.
Houston TransStar is bringing real-time traffic information to your fingertips with fast and easy-to-use tools. With a customized route builder to get you where you're going and personalized alerts to steer you away from problems, Houston TransStar is the leader in traffic information. Instant, accurate, reliable. Houston TransStar.
Welcome back to Mobility Now. My guest, Jeff Table, and I are discussing livable centers. Jeff, we talked some about the variety of livable centers, but what are some of the more common elements, particularly the public investment, that help to get these livable centers started?
Well, I think that the common element of all of them, obviously, is creating a safe pedestrian environment. So each one of our livable centers projects takes a look at how are people actually going to get around, whether they've driven there and parked, whether they've gotten off a bus or light rail transit, ridden their bike, or they're just walking between buildings. And then we actually identify and prioritize sidewalks, crosswalks, in some cases extensions to the curb to make the shorter crossing, safer crossing distance on the road. So I would say the public investments generally begin with that sort of pedestrian infrastructure. Additionally, though, sometimes the under-the-ground pipes if you will, were really not set up to sustain higher levels of activity. So that kind of infrastructure can be important as well. So I think oftentimes the developers are really looking for a commitment on behalf of the city, or if it's in what's called a management district or county, to say, okay, we're going to put down the foundation, if you will, that enables us to make this sort of private investment in the buildings, which are the offices, the stores, the residences and like. So it really is, as I said before, a partnership, I think, in getting comfortable with working together hand in hand, local governments and private investors.
I know in some of them you've also looked at how traffic flows around and through the Livable Centers area. In fact, I can recall at least one study where, because traffic had declined over many years, there were some thoughts about ways to actually reuse some of that street space for other purposes, like landscaping. In
some cases, I think, and I know this is hard to believe in the Houston region, we almost have too much pavement, where there really isn't that much traffic. It creates, like I said before with the parking lots, more of an empty zone, and to try to fill that up better with landscaping or benches or things that make it more attractive to people can actually improve the area in terms of the amount of business and housing it can support.
Well, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities for livable centers in our region? What are the kinds of things that are happening, either in terms of other growth and development, or maybe characteristics of people who live here that make this a greater possibility today? I think
the biggest opportunity is what we would call demographic. You know, I'm in the baby boom. You know, our child has moved out, so my wife and I are no longer primarily interested in space or what school zone we're in.
Big yard.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, the less of that I need to worry about, the better. So there's a lot of other people in that age group, and similarly, you know, our kids are still largely in that, you know, getting their first job type of thing. So they're not yet in the family formation mode either. So you look at it from the regional level, and the two biggest population groups now are becoming these people whose kids are gone, and the kids who haven't yet started families yet. So I think that's the market. And even if a large number of people still prefer more of the single family commuter-oriented neighborhood, that is becoming less of a share of the overall population in the region. And frankly, the other thing is just the fun factor. I think there is an interest in coming to a place that's a little bit more different and a little bit more fun, and spend a little bit more time there and maybe spend a little more money.
Well, what about the role of mass transportation? You mentioned that in two of the studies at least, it played an important role in the consideration about maybe either where the center was or how it might be organized or developed.
Well, I would say the location of transit has been important in maybe all but one or two of the 17 studies. So not all of them are on the metro rail system, but all of them have some sort of important transit component. And again, I think these are things, it's kind of like a chicken and egg. You know, it's easier to provide better transit service when people can go a lot of different destinations on foot after they get off there. So it's like I might consider taking the bus or the rail if I knew I wasn't just going to be stranded at the end of my trip. And so I think the Livable Center and the transit really reinforce each other in a very good way.
Well, what are some of the biggest challenges to this idea? It sounds like there's a potentially very large market for it, both with folks who are looking to downsize their living choice and those who are starting out.
I think the biggest challenge is just the way we think about things. And I know that may sound like a little bit of a soft answer, but you know, we do things a certain way. We've done them a certain way for a long time. So when cities think about how would we implement this livable center plan, you know, maybe the way we think about parking, or the way we think about driveways, or the way we think about, you know, programming funds for investment just needs to be a little bit better attuned to this sort of planning than planning for more auto-oriented places where activities are separated and spread out. Doesn't mean one's right or wrong, it just requires a different sort of approach. and I think a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with this approach. So I think once we get a little more practice at working on the details, because there's a lot more moving parts, if you will, when you think about putting businesses and homes and stores all together than when you think about separating them. So I think that's it, just thinking about whether our way of thinking is really in sync with our goals and our vision.
Does this often require communities to rethink their, say, their master plan if they have one?
Yes, and that's one reason why we have, in all of our studies, had a very significant public engagement element. We want to make sure that whatever comes out in a Livable Centers project where HGAC has partnered with the city, that it reflects the desires of the residents and the businesses and the property owners, and in some cases is adopted into their comprehensive plan, and changes in ordinances and investment patterns can result. So the worst thing that could happen with any of these plans is they go up on a shelf and are not heard from again.
And although we don't have much more time, tell me a little bit more about the involvement of local groups of citizens who are interested in these ideas.
Well, again, we have had very successful participation from what we would call stakeholders, whether it be chambers of commerce or community associations, and I think there's growing interest. I would encourage anybody to check out our website, and all the studies that have been completed are up there, and take a look through and see what you think. Also would encourage anybody to get out and visit some of these places and just stretch your legs and join in the excitement of this movement.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you being our guest today. That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank again Jeff Table, Director of Community and Environmental Planning, for joining us on Mobility Now. And thank you for watching.